The number one goal is to network and connect. Welcome everybody to the Thursday Pivot. I really appreciate your taking the time and joining us here today. My name is Lori Power and I'm a group benefits specialist. So we build innovative, custom design benefit packages for our clients. And one of our promises to our clients and our connectors alike is to be consistently responsive. And part of that being consistently responsive was the development here of this weekly Zoom cast. I wanted to bring experts into the room so that people can come and have an open conversation, open networking, and get to know right from source. So that's why we have Phil in the room today. So Phil Tyson comes to us from Global Benefits Advisors, and he is a travel expert, most especially on expats, but he can speak to everything travel related. Phil, why don't you take a moment and give us a brief background about yourself, how you came into specializing in the travel world?
I started in the insurance business some 35 plus years ago. Actually started in claims through Citadel and worked for Manulife and the now defunct Confederation Life as well. Then moved on to basically after figuring out that the sales guys had way much more fun playing golf and working better hours than the claims people did, said, I think it's time to get over on that side of the business. And so started in on the group business and then moved into the international some 18, 19 years ago, specifically
on calendar. Quick.
It's alert. We're supposed to be here. We're good.
Okay, fair enough. Primarily on the expatriate and business travel side of things. So when we say expatriate, we mean essentially anybody working in another country other than their home country. So it didn't matter whether it was a Canadian going to work in India or an Indian coming to work in Canada, they were all an expatriate. At the end of the day, there's different terms that people put around these different types of travelers, but essentially they become expat, and whether it's short-term or long-term is kind of the distinction in the benefit world. So we've done everything from looking at it from pure brokerage to being a managing general underwriter and being an underwriter as well. So that's my background. I'm now out on my own doing this we just finished our 6th year actually as an independent company. So I think I've made it over that 2 or 3 year hump that small businesses always seem to fear about. So that's me in a nutshell.
Well, congratulations on making it over the hump. It's the experience that you bring to the table that's really important. And I'm sure you're getting a lot of interesting phone calls, much like we all are. I think the pandemic, because we're now 5 coming into 6 months of this, it's now in our minds old hash. It's just what we do, you pull out your little masks and we're off to the races. So there is that idea that, well, if we've adjusted, then we can travel and there shouldn't be any restrictions. What kind of questions are you getting?
Well, there's a lot just from the basic, am I covered? Will I be covered for more specifically COVID? That's probably the biggest question that I get. And many people are just looking at their travel specifically from that point of view, which, is a bit of a scary situation because you're not really thinking about the 99.99% of everything else that's going to happen and whether or not the travel coverage that you purchased, although it may specifically exclude COVID, what impact does that have on the other side of it too? Because it just doesn't say, I'm going to exclude COVID per se. It excludes the act of travel, period. Well, there's the travel act, and then there's the actual condition for, am I going to be covered for this type of incident? So the two are quite interrelated, but they're very, very separate. And I'm finding that's where a lot of people are kind of falling down and not quite understanding, well, I didn't have COVID, but so I should still be covered. And that's not the case.
Well, you and I have spoken about as well, Phil, is there had been uh, policies in place that already had pandemic exclusions.
Mhm.
So now the COVID being considered a pandemic, they don't need to rewrite the policy. How is that applicable?
Well, it's applicable to the point that it's really not covering COVID. It's already, I had many clients now that already had essentially pandemic wording in their policies. So it would say, we're going to exclude viral or bacterial type pandemics or conditions. Well, you can have a bacterial condition which they would further go on and say, we will cover it in the event of an emergency or an accident or the acquisition by accidental means. However, that's to bacterial, not to viral. And COVID is a viral illness, therefore that will already be excluded. So as I said, Lori, a long time ago, if you really want to know what's covered in your policy, just go to your exclusions. Exclusions will tell you just about everything you want to know about what's going to be covered and what's not going to be covered. And it's not necessarily in not declining, but specifically outlining what isn't covered, but under what circumstances coverage is available. So if you're going now and looking, the biggest issue people are forgetting is that there's a travel advisory in place. And the government of Canada has strictly said, you're not going to be covered, or you will have some issues if you travel to these places. Well, there's a travel advisory in place. You can go to www.canada.ca, click on the government's website, go under travel. It will give you all the travel advisories that you need, and it will list every specific country where they have a travel advisory and under which conditions that they're saying either travel or avoid unnecessary travel, avoid travel at all costs. So it's very, very specific. So insurers are relying on that to say, well, you may have coverage for travel for a heart attack while you're in the US. However, you're traveling now when there's a travel advisory against going to the US. Therefore, you're not going to get covered. COVID has absolutely nothing to do with it.
And I think that's where my default, you and I have spoken about that. I know, Alan, you and I will be talking about that as well, is, travel insurance, like any insurance, is protection against an unknown risk. As soon as you decide to travel in a known risk, you nullify the policy itself, which brings us to Sharon's question. Of course, on the group benefit side, it's more ambiguous, right? It's more general terms. It doesn't get into a lot of the specifics, but we do know that there are provinces in Canada that basically have closed borders of their own, even though we're within the same country. So what does it look like when we're traveling within our own country right now?
Well, yeah, we're getting the same questions, and I take a very conservative point of view that if you're moving into or going into a province that has a travel ban on it, that you should apply the same logic to travel interprovincially as you do, outside of Canada or internationally. And I think a lot of the problems we have is a lot of people don't realize that traveling to the United States is considered international travel. Most of them think it's domestic travel, and it's just not. And it actually comes to a genuine surprise to a lot of people that, well, I'm just going down to Montana. Yeah, well, you're crossing a border. That's international travel. And I would say 80% of the people just are stunned by that fact.
Well, they don't want to hear it, Phil.
No, they don't want to hear it. So essentially, we're applying kind of the same rules. If it applies cross-border internationally, then if there's a travel restriction interprovincially, apply the same logic. And if you're not sure, you really have to call your insurance company, especially on group benefits. Probably you're not going to run into any issues. However, the fact is that you may still be in Canada if it's a travel restriction. It's not the condition that's being restricted, it's the act of travel.
That's right. That's exactly true.
Two different issues. And, you really just have to ask the insurance company, am I going to be covered? And as I always say, get it in writing.
I was just
Get it in
thinking that.
writing.
Get that in writing.
You
Tim,
know,
why don't you unmute and ask your question?
I was hoping you could probably make sense of that. Okay, so a business owner who has group insurance through the work, they're looking to travel more. I guess transition into semi-retirement. And are there any like reasonably, I suppose, reasonably foreseeable risks in assuming that that policy or whatever kind of coverage is included in the group benefits? Um, are there any unforeseeable risks that would not be covered? Oh, nice dog. Would not be covered in the group benefits policy as opposed to purchasing a standalone travel insurance policy? Does that make sense?
You know what, I'll take it from my perspective.
Thank you.
I have found that the group policies, because they're broader, have during the pandemic, at any rate, stepped up where the individual coverages have not. What's your take on that, Phil?
I've always been of the opinion, if you have group coverage, I'm not entirely sure the value of buying individual travel medical. Uh, the group policies are, as you say, they're pretty broad, they're fairly robust. Um, and I personally have never gone out when I was covered under a group benefits plan and bought my own private individual travel insurance. Now, the one thing it doesn't cover, admittedly, is the ancillary benefits such as, lost luggage, cancellation and whatnot, but strictly from a health risk point of view, they're just as good. And I don't see the need personally to go out and buy and double up on a health benefit, because all you're ending up with is now who's going to squabble about who's going to pay first if something happens. So from a health point of view, I think it's just replicating it. In the current environment, my previous comment I would still hold true is the risk is not the condition of which you would be worried about. It's the act of traveling itself. Will my carrier permit travel under its blanket policy that's in my group policy at this point, even though a travel advisory has been issued? And if the answer is no, well, there's your risk, is you're not going to be covered from COVID or anything else, period.
Well, and I've had situations, to Tim's point, in the past, and as you were talking, it reminded me that I have had employees make claims where they're covered on both the group policy, but had gone out and purchased top up, or they had coverage through their credit card, and the group policy is the first payer. So irregardless of them topping something up, it's never going to be paid twice. It's like any insurance. Once the claim is paid, the claim is paid. But again, we've had claims of $80, $100, $110,000 that were paid in USD and without issues on the group side.
I think, a lot of people have to, when you're talking about travel, especially Tim, when you're talking about business travel, they are kind of two different animals here. Your group policies are generally designed and built to cover off very short-term vacation travel. That's the genesis. I'm not going to work outside of Canada or Calgary or whatever for any length of time. This is to cover me and myself and my family while we go down to Disneyland for 2 weeks. That's the total design of a group benefits policy. And most travel policies that you buy, over the internet or through a broker or whatnot. When you talk about business travel, you're now talking about something entirely different, which can be specific to work-related activities, specific to certain regions where other carriers may or may not provide coverage, and for certain activities that may or may not be covered under a traditional kind of, call it a vacation travel policy. So you have those types of situations, and they may be for longer term travel. They might be for folks that go out and they're doing a 3-month trip. They're visiting 15 different countries. Well, how do you do that? Or some of it has to do with just the administrative aspect of getting a blanket business policy versus going out and buying individual travel policies every time, Bob decides he's going to go. And we all know Bob's not going to pick up the phone, even though that he should, and buy his travel insurance. I'm picking on you, Bob, for business travel. Because it just becomes boring, and you know what, I just forgot, I had that emergency business trip tomorrow. I forgot to put the insurance in place. So, there are different aspects that you have to actually worry about from business to personal.
And that brings us to those specialty carriers like you and I were talking about. You have like Bonnie, good friend of a lot of people in the room here, from Chubb, specializing in that business travel. So you're not going to get those same exclusions on traveling that you would even in a group policy, because it is specific to the business owners or business travel.
Surprisingly, right now on the business side of it, on the travel, we are starting to see exclusions coming in specifically for COVID. They're not excluding the act of traveling, but COVID is being specifically excluded, and most of it's from this pandemic wording. A lot of them already have it in there, but they're now just actually specifically excluding it. And we're seeing more of it from basically European carriers who seem to be a little bit more risk adverse. Surprisingly, the American carriers are quite open to providing COVID coverage. They're not having any restrictions whatsoever.
And that's indicative of where they're standing on the pandemic as well. You and I've talked about and I think it's important to state in this room that, as you said, read your exclusions if you really want to know what your policy covers. But not all providers are the same. Like the underwriters are different depending on where they're coming from. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing trend-wise, different parts or different carriers.
Well, so you have to kind of deal with the different parts of the world kind of differently. So if you look at the American side of things, you're talking about the traditional model that you and I would know up in Canada. You have individual insurance companies, you have AIG and you have Cigna and you have Aetna and those types of carriers, which can be both domestic and international in scope. In Canada, we have much the same kind of philosophy. Manulife's, your Sun Life's, these are all individually owned insurance companies. When you start to get into the European market, you will find that what a lot of people think are insurance companies are not. They tend to be managing general underwriters that look and feel and act and do everything that the insurance company does, except for the one vital element, and that is take the risk.
Yeah.
Okay? So, you'll find Lloyd's of London stands behind many of these providers, and itself is not an insurance company. And I don't know how much you guys know about Lloyd's, but Lloyd's is nothing more than a collection of insurance companies or risk-taking entities. So even if somebody says, oh, Lloyd's won't do this, well, that's a bit of a broad statement. Lloyd's consists of, hundreds of different insurance companies. The best analogy I can give to that is to say, okay, if you look at Chinook Center would be itself equal to Lloyd's. And then you have all these individual little stores inside the mall. Well, those, in the Lloyd's world, those are all insurance companies. Every one of those, as they refer to them as syndicates, is actually an insurance company.
And they're for profit.
They can have different rules and regulations. You could go in and walk into Lloyd's, and insurance company A says, I'll do that. And insurance company B says, no, I don't want to do that.
What are the most, prior to the pandemic, and then I want to move into future speak, prior to the pandemic, what are the most common overlooked exclusions that people see on a policy? Doesn't matter what kind of policy it is, but it's often overlooked and often comes back to bite them in the hump.
Well, that's a tough question.
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
Yeah, you know, off the top of my head, Lori, I couldn't say, you know, which is the most often overlooked. Um, I think it's the eligibility question, at least in my world, because it's where am I going? Am I going to be covered there? Because these days, it's not just the benefits are the benefits are the benefits. Um, you know, throughout the world, a hospital benefit, how much can you change it? You know, am I going to cover private or semi-private hospital or ward rate? You know, and that doesn't change throughout the world. You know, I mean, it is what it is. But you know, will my policy cover me in, you know, in Iran? Okay, well, if I want to go to Iran, you know, can I go there? You know, they may not have a country exclusion, but they may have sanctions against that country.
Yeah.
Right? A classic example is Cuba. I mean, for Canadians, if you want to run into a conundrum, you know, tell somebody over in Europe that you're a Canadian, you want to go work in Cuba or go for a vacation in Cuba, and they'll say, can't do it. Well, wait a second. You're a British company. Well, actually, well, no, we're not. We're owned by an American company. We're a subsidiary of an American country or a company. So you really have to watch the eligibility rules and the compliance to where you're going, how long you're going, and what you're doing. So you can be perfectly covered for that same company in Canada or in the US. The second you step into Cuba and the insurance company gets a bill from that's got a Cuban address on it, well, they just go completely and utterly crazy.
Well, and they're sticklers for checking that policy as you cross those borders, get off the plane into Cuba too. The exclusions or the known risks are something that I see a lot. And over the last 10 years, what I see are people going into the States with a known medical condition in order to access medical treatment or therapies in the States and expecting those to be covered. Claudia's shaking her head or nodding as well, and expecting those to be covered under their emergency medical, you know, and I do see that frequently, and it boggles my mind.
Yeah, I mean, purely from a travel point of view, yeah, I would think you would be right that the pre-X condition is the biggest one that people overlook. What is a pre-X condition, or you know, what's a stable pre-X condition? And they seem to be all over the map. And I think you have to really sit down and then read them, and then read them again, and then try and kind of.
Do you mind if I jump in on this one?
Yeah, go ahead, Alan.
So I specialize in snowbird market, and I've been doing it for many years, like I've said. And usually what I say is there's three elements for travel insurance for these, you know, for people. It's the eligibility, like Phil was saying, it's the category questions and stability. And so generally what we say is like, just because you're eligible, just because you're in that right category doesn't necessarily mean you're covered for everything. Stability is a big factor for things. And a lot of times, like, for the most part, we don't blame clients and we don't think they're trying to fraud the insurance company. But what happens is a lot of times they don't understand what's in their medical records. And so I've seen this so often that, you know, you ask them, we get an extensive medical background, our client information form, and it gives all the information about them, whether it's they had a transplant to what medications they have and what stability they have. So the better it is, the more information I have, the better it is I can figure out what plan is the best one for them to try to support them, making sure that they're in the right category or eligible in the right category, and discuss the stability options for them. And so a lot of times we'll go through it and we'll be like, okay, so do you have any heart condition? No. Okay. And then as we talk through it, and I've seen this many times, it's like, oh, you take this medication. And I'm like, in my head, because I'm experienced, I know, well, that might be for a heart condition. I'm like, and so it brings up discussions. So it's like, okay. But it's like, I don't have a heart condition, but my heart skips a beat every once in a while. but my doctor said I don't have a heart condition. I'm like, okay, well, Ron,
Related.
yeah. I'm like, Ron, you gotta say yes to a heart condition. He's like, no, but the doctor said I'm fine. I'm like, okay, well, if I'm telling you, for travel insurance purposes, like if an event of a claim is something that happens, they're going to go back to your doctor's records. And then, you know, they're not going to talk to you. They're not going to talk to your doctor. They're going to just go by what's on paper. And so what they do is,
and
whatever.
Alan, to that point, Alan, this is where, you know, Bob and I have had many conversations about that as somebody who's actually calling you and having the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, the added risk is somebody who goes and purchases it online, expecting that there's going to be travel without any conversation about what is a known risk and what isn't a known risk and the stability cause.
Oh, yeah.
And those that are willing to go down for medical treatment just because.
Oh, it's good. I deal with all, like any of the denied claims as well. And I see a lot of why it went wrong. And a lot of times, like I said, it's them not understanding fully what's in the record. And the doctor doesn't necessarily have to tell them what they have. If it could hinder their health further than what they have, they don't necessarily have to tell them. And so we've had many denied claims where they come to us and we support them and say, and they get a doctor's letter stating that they didn't tell them. We've seen many, we help them with the appeal, and a lot of times it gets overturned with claims. So travel insurance is very complicated. There's no right answer. There's some companies where, you know, if you are in a category and you forget something within that, if that category supersedes the other things, then that person is fine. But there's other companies where if you miss a question that affects the rate, then it could be automatically denied if the insurance companies really wanted to. So we have about 10 different plans that we deal with, and they're all very different. And I'm going to go back. Sorry. Go ahead. I was going to go back to what Phil was saying, and you're right, Phil. Totally, everything that you're saying, definitely preaching to it. You know, with the travel advisories, you know, the insurance people don't realize we have clients going down now that are you can't stop them sometimes unless they're actually stopped at the border, but they're still going down. I was dealing with a son that was the father's going to Croatia, and there's no stopping him, so he bought insurance for coverage everything other than COVID, right? And then there's Ontario Blue Cross, as of right now, is the only plan that would cover COVID. Medipack, you guys all heard of Medipack.
I found that Medipack will cover, but
the funny thing about Medipack is on their media, everything that they're sending out, they're saying that they'll cover it, but there's nothing in writing, which is extremely odd. I've never seen this before. And they actually have that same exclusion, just like every other company, about the travel advisory. So, you know, travel to a country in a specific area for which, prior to your effective date of the insurance of your trip, start date, Foreign Affairs, Trade or Development Canada, Global Affairs Canada, has issued a travel warning advising Canadian residents not to travel to that country or specific area. They still have that in their policy wording, and they won't have any amendment to that to support clients for this. So and it's funny that they have that in there.
And that brings us to the end of our session. But one last thing to wrap it up, Phil, is what does travel look like after the pandemic? What do you see happening? Are people going to be more cautious? Is it going to be that elastic band?
More cautious. I'm not too sure. In my opinion, I don't think anybody's going to be in a big mad rush to get out there and travel the world. You know, I think I can see this dragging on for a couple of years, quite frankly. You know, I think if history has shown us anything, you know, once you start to get into these, unless we have a bona fide vaccine, that, you know, we could be looking at this pandemic for 2 years. We're quite frankly, 1/3 of the way into it, not even 1/3
Yeah.
into a worldwide pandemic. So, look to history. It'll tell you where we need to be. And that's my thought. I think business travel by necessity will start to happen. I think you need to have companies that will provide business travelers with worldwide protection, including COVID, because it's just a necessity. And there are certain companies that are continuing to do that. So it won't be that there's not product around for that specific reason. Personal travel, though, vacation travel, gonna flip down to Montana to Big White for a couple of days of skiing. I guess my own personal take on that is why? Why would you want to go to the worst place in the world at this point in time that's managing this pandemic when you can kind of go down the road 60 minutes and get the same thing and not really have to worry about it too much?
There is the misnomer that people think if I can purchase a plane ticket, therefore I must be able to purchase coverage to match. And they put those hand in hand, and I've had those conversations. Well, if I can't get coverage, I shouldn't be able to buy the plane ticket. Okay.
It's kind of the equation that we used to use or still use in the expat business for evacuations. When a war happens, well, will my evac carrier get me out? Well, yes, they will, provided they can land the plane on the runway that's just been bombed. But your practical reality is there's nowhere to land.
Yeah, and how long will you have to wait for that coverage to occur or that evacuation to happen? I thank you so much for coming in today, Phil. The information is phenomenal, and I hope that you'll come back and we'll do an update as things progress. Thanks to everybody who came out. Again, the goal is to connect with one another, have a virtual coffee. We all grow when we all succeed, and we will all succeed with the right information. So if you've enjoyed today's Thursday Pivot, I do hope you'll come back. I hope that you may come on out, tell a friend, and join in the conversation. And by all means, remember my day job is a group benefits broker. So if you know somebody who's interested in group benefits, I hope you'll give them my name and pass it along. Thanks so much, Phil. And to everybody, please accept this as my handshake to you.